Imagine you are a park ranger trekking through the lower edges of Peru's Madre de Dios region, one of the densest, least forgiving jungles on Earth. The air is humid. A suffocating wall of green presses in from every direction, and each step sinks slightly into soil that has been damp for centuries. The jungle breathes around you, cicadas pulsing, unseen monkeys shrieking in the canopy, the distant roll of thunder promising rain before nightfall. And then, just off the faint trail, you see it, a circle of weathered wooden poles, still upright, bound together with vines hardened like wire over the years. At first it looks like some ancient indigenous marker, or perhaps a forgotten ceremonial site. But then your flashlight beam slides across the poles and catches on something that turns your stomach. Scraps of nylon fabric, shredded and blackened, clinging to the wood like burned flags. Rusted buckles, straps, and the unmistakable outline of human bone. Arms lashed behind backs. Legs bent unnaturally. 12 years of jungle rot. Yet the scene is unmistakable. Bodies had been tied here. The stench is faint, mostly overtaken by wet earth and vegetation. But the silence is heavier than any noise. This is where the case of the vanished backpackers of Peru finally resurfaced. A discovery too grotesque, too deliberate, to ever be called an accident. And it begins in 2009. They were 3 friends in their mid-20s, backpackers chasing the last great uncharted adventure of South America. Daniel Mercer, 25, from Manchester, England. A restless traveler with a faded compass tattoo on his forearm. He had studied anthropology at university, always fascinated with cultures that lived outside the modern world. His friends called him the historian because he wrote nightly in a weathered, leather-bound journal he never traveled without. Lavra Bennett, 24, from Melbourne, Australia. An aspiring travel photographer. Lavra carried a Nikon DSLR wrapped in scarves to protect it from humidity. She had an eye for stillness, for those fleeting portraits of strangers on buses or the way dawn touched tin roofs in mountain villages. Her father later said, she believed the world was still bigger than our screens. She wanted to prove it with her lens. Ethan Walsh, 26, from Denver, Colorado. A free-spirited musician who played guitar in hostels to fund parts of his travel. He was the glue of the trio, the loud laugh in markets, the one who could barter with locals or diffuse tension. He wore a beaded bracelet his younger sister had made, a thin string of red and black threads, fragile, but never removed. They met 6 months earlier in Cusco, Peru, on the backpacker trail. Daniel was documenting Incan ruins, Lavra photographing street festivals, Ethan busking outside small cafes. What began as casual companionship solidified into something deeper. By July 2009, they had one shared plan: trek into the lesser-known jungles east of Cusco, into Madre de Dios. Their families thought it would be just another adventure. A week or two, Daniel emailed his brother. "We'll resurface with stories." That was the last email. The trio left Puerto Maldonado, a dusty frontier town, on July 14, 2009. Receipts show they bought rice, canned beans, mosquito nets, and 2 machetes. A hostel clerk remembered Ethan tuning his guitar on the porch the night before they left. From there, their trail fades quickly. Locals reported seeing 3 foreigners boarding a battered, green truck heading toward the Las Piedras River. The driver, later questioned, recalled dropping them at a logging track where the jungle swallows the road. Daniel's journal, recovered later in fragments, described the beginning: humidity like a second skin. Every sound amplified. Lavra already has 3 bites. Ethan sings to keep spirits high. Tomorrow we push deeper, past the logging camps. Goal is to find the hidden cataract spoken of by the boatmen. That entry was dated July 16, 2009. It was the last dated entry anyone would ever see. When they failed to call home by early August, their families began emailing, calling, leaving messages that went unanswered. At first, silence could be explained by poor reception, remoteness. But weeks dragged into dread. By September 2009, concern had hardened into crisis. Laura's parents flew from Australia to Peru. Daniel's brother contacted the British consulate. Ethan's mother, her voice breaking in televised interviews, begged, "If anyone saw them, if anyone knows anything, please come forward. We just need them home." Search teams assembled in Puerto Maldonado, Peruvian police, local guides, even a helicopter borrowed from a mining company. For days they swept riverbanks and logging roads, but the jungle resisted. Rain erased tracks overnight. Vines swallowed paths. Dogs lost scent trails at the edge of the Las Piedras. Even with GPS, rescuers reported malfunctioning equipment, compasses spinning erratically, batteries drained by humidity. One guide recalled something unnerving, a faint clearing deep in the jungle, where they found scraps of blue nylon tent fabric fluttering from branches. But when they pushed farther, night fell too quickly, forcing retreat. The tent scraps were never recovered. Families lingered at base camps, staring into the tree line, listening to the shrill chorus of insects and wondering if their children's voices were somewhere inside. As weeks bled into months, the official search scaled back. By December 2009, the case was formally suspended. The families clung to hope. Vigils were held in Manchester, Melbourne, and Denver. Photos of the trio, smiling on buses, standing at Machu Picchu, laughing around hostile tables, were printed onto thousands of missing posters. For a while, they were tacked onto cafe doors across Cusco, fluttering in wind and rain. But time corrodes memory. By 2011, posters had faded to white sheets barely legible. Hostels replaced them with new advertisements. Travelers stopped asking. Daniel's brother kept his phone number active, refusing to change it in case. Dan called home. Laura's father left her bedroom untouched, her photos still stacked in envelopes on the desk. Ethan's sister wore a replica of the beaded bracelet she had once made for him. Threads worn thin with years of nervous pulling. It became one of Peru's countless cold cases. Until 12 years later, the jungle gave something back. August 22, a Peruvian ranger patrol, surveying illegal logging activity near the Las Piedras, hacked through dense vines and stumbled upon something strange. A ring of wooden poles, upright, weather-stained but unmistakably arranged by human hands. Tattered ropes clung to them. Scraps of nylon dangled. And amid roots and damp leaves, bones, long bones, rib cages, skull fragments, tethered as if time itself had tied them in place. But one item stood out most. Dangling from a vine, clinging impossibly intact after 12 years of jungle rain, was a small string of red and black beads, the bracelet. Ethan's bracelet. The ranger radioed for backup, voice shaking. The case of the vanished backpackers was no longer about hope. It was about what horrors had unfolded here. Fade to black. When word of the ranger's discovery reached Puerto Maldonado in August 2021, the jungle town buzzed with rumors. Some said it was an old indigenous ritual site. Others whispered about Los Maquileros, the backpackers. Peruvian authorities arrived within 48 hours. The site was deep, requiring days of travel by truck, boat, and foot. Investigators hacked through vines until the clearing revealed itself once more. The poles were real. 12 in total, roughly 3 meters high, arranged in a circle like some crude cage without walls. Each pole bore grooves from rope bindings. Remnants of bone still clung to several, fused with vines that had swallowed them over the years. The ground was a graveyard. Forensic teams carefully sifted through mud and roots. They unearthed fragments of clothing, a torn hiking boot sole, faded denim, melted nylon zippers. And then, a breakthrough. A jawbone with intact dental work, a camera memory card, warped but recoverable. And that red and black beaded bracelet, still knotted at one end. Asterisk. Dental records would later confirm the bone belonged to Lavra Bennett. For the families, after 12 years of silence, Confirmation hit like a blow. Laura's father wept on Australian news, voice trembling. We begged for answers. We begged for even a trace. And now all we have is proof she died out there. But the question wasn't just whether they had died. It was how and why tied to poles. Journalists who managed to access photos of the site described a haunting tableau. A circle of upright poles, vines snaking around them, each crowned with shredded fabric fluttering in the damp air. In the center, a collapsed fire pit, half buried in leaves. It looked less like a campsite than a ritual stage. One reporter said, "It was as if the jungle had tried to erase the crime, but the bones refused to disappear." That photo, the vine-wrapped poles under a stormy Peruvian sky, became the defining image of the case's reopening. Interpol flagged the discovery. British, Australian, and American officials pressed Peru to allow foreign forensic experts into the jungle. Within weeks, specialists arrived, battling the same suffocating conditions that had once swallowed the backpackers. Initial forensic analysis told a chilling story. Rope fibers indicated the victims. Wrists had been tied behind their backs. Some bones displayed perimortem fractures, breaks occurring at or near the time of death, not from decay. Knife marks were present on several ribs. It was no accident. A crime had occurred, but whose crime? Theories flooded the investigation. Indigenous tribes. Some speculated that an uncontacted tribe had killed the foreigners, mistaking them for intruders, but anthropologists pushed back. No known tribe in Madre de Dios practiced executions by binding victims to poles, and the use of synthetic rope found at the site indicated outside involvement. Illegal loggers and miners. Region is notorious for illegal logging and gold mining. Backpackers wandering too close to guarded camps may have been seen as threats. Witnesses recalled rumors of foreigners disappearing after clashing with loggers. One former logger testified anonymously. If outsiders came near the pits, they never left. The outsider theory most chilling was the suggestion of a single individual, an outsider, who lived in the jungle, preying on wanderers. Locals spoke of a figure called El Hombre del Rio, the man of the river, a reclusive foreigner seen occasionally in river villages, trading animal pelts and tools. His real name was unclear. Some said German, others American. Always alone, always watching. Theories blurred fact and fear. But investigators had one advantage now: the warped camera memory card. Specialists in Lima painstakingly dried and restored fragments of the camera's memory card. Weeks later, images surfaced. The first were ordinary: Laura's photographs of riverbanks, Daniel crouching to write in his journal, Ethan balancing on a log bridge. Smiling, sweaty, alive. But then, the tone shifted. A photo dated July 18th showed their tent slashed open. Another, blurry, taken at dusk, captured a figure in the tree line. Bare-chested, bearded, holding a machete. And the last recovered photo, a shot of the clearing at night. The poles, already erected. A fire glowed at the center. The trio was not in the frame. For the families, the images reopened wounds that had scarred over for more than a decade. Daniel's brother, clutching the printed photos at a press conference in London, whispered, he saw something. He wrote it down. And then they built those poles. Ethan's mother broke down when shown the bracelet. He never took it off. Even then, he was still wearing it. Grief hardened into demand. They wanted accountability. They wanted a name. Attention turned to a man named Hans Keller, a Swiss national in his early 50s. Keller had lived off-grid in Peru since the late 1990s. He was a known recluse, occasionally appearing in Puerto Maldonado to trade jaguar pelts or buy gasoline. Locals described him as paranoid, armed, and fiercely territorial. In 2009, around the time the backpackers vanished, Keller had been seen upriver with 3 foreigners. A logging camp worker remembered, 2 men and a woman. He said they were staying with him. Then, a week later, he was alone again. But Keller had vanished years earlier. His hut, deep in the forest, was found abandoned in 2013. Food rotted, belongings scattered. No trace since. Was Keller the figure in Laura's blurred photograph? Or just another ghost swallowed by the jungle? Investigators carefully preserved Ethan's bracelet. Despite 12 years of decay, the red and black threads were intact. Experts noted it must have been tied tight, buried under leaves, shielded from full exposure. The bracelet appeared in news reports worldwide. For Ethan's sister, it was unbearable. "That was mine. I made it for him when I was 11. It should be on his wrist." Not hanging from a pole in the jungle, the object became a symbol. Not just of Ethan, but of youth stolen, of innocence bound to horror. Across the world, the rediscovery reignited interest. But it also resurfaced a painful reality. 12 years had changed everything. Daniel's mother had passed away in 2017, never knowing her son's fate. Laura's father, once sharp-eyed and restless, now walked with a cane, frail from illness. Ethan's sister had grown from a child into an adult, carrying the weight of her brother's memory into her own adulthood. Missing posters from 2009 resurfaced in old hostel walls, curled and yellowed. A cafe in Cusco still had one taped beneath layers of newer flyers, the ink almost invisible, but the faces recognizable. The world had moved on. But for the families, the discovery was proof. Memory may fade, but tragedy lingers. In November 2021, Peruvian police made a startling announcement. While combing the jungle for additional evidence, they found a second site, only 2 kilometers from the first. This time, it wasn't poles. It was a crude wooden hut, long collapsed, hidden beneath vines. Inside, rusted pots, animal bones, a machete blade, and in the corner, Daniel's leather-bound journal. The final pages were smeared, ink blurred by rain. But one entry remained legible. It read, "He watches us at night. We hear him moving around the tent. Tomorrow he says he will show us something. Laura is afraid. Ethan too. I do not trust him. But we have no choice. We must follow." The entry ended there. Fade to black. The discovery of Daniel Mercer's journal in November 2021 electrified investigators. For 12 years, the families had wondered what his final words might have been. Now smudged beneath layers of mildew, faint sentences surfaced like voices from the grave. The earlier entries matched his usual style. Meticulous notes on weather, insect bites, sketches of local birds. But the tone darkened abruptly. "We met a man on the river. Foreign, not Peruvian. His Spanish is broken. He offered shelter. Ethan trusts him too quickly. Laura says something feels wrong. His hut is strange. Skulls of animals everywhere. He cooks little, just chews coca. He sharpens knives at night. He built poles. He says they are for drying skins. But they are tall, too tall. I don't believe him." The final legible entry. "He wants us to stay. Says the forest does not release those who enter. Laura is crying. Ethan is restless. I will hide this book if I can. If anyone finds it, remember us." It was signed only with his initials. DM. The journal confirmed what investigators feared. The trio had not simply vanished into jungle chaos. They had crossed paths with someone who wanted them bound. Attention returned to Hans Keller, the Swiss recluse. Interpol unearthed fragments of his past. Born in Zurich, former carpenter, backpacked across South America in the 1980s. By the late 90s, he was living almost entirely off-grid in Peru. Locals nicknamed him El Hombre del Rio. Witnesses described him as gaunt, intense, with piercing blue eyes. He traveled alone by dugout canoe, trading jaguar pelts and crafted tools. He carried machetes at all times, often 2 strapped across his chest. But most disturbing were the accounts of hostility, a boatman recalled. Keller warning him, Foreigners bring sickness. They should never come here. A logger said Keller threatened him with a machete for entering his territory. No one had seen him since 2013. His hut, abandoned, was left to the forest. Pots rusted, hammocks rotted. Only one item remained relatively intact: a collection of ropes and bindings stored in a tin box. To police, the parallels were chilling. Was Keller the blurred figure in Laura's photograph? The one watching them from the tree line? Forensic artists reconstructed the clearing from recovered evidence. Their illustration showed 12 poles, ropes strung between, 3 figures bound upright, faces obscured by vines. It became a viral image, shared with captions like "The Lost Camp" or "Peru's Jungle Crucifixion." Though speculative, it gave the world a stark, unforgettable tableau of what might have happened in those final hours. The families traveled to Peru. For the first time since the disappearance, Laura's father, frail but determined, insisted on visiting the clearing. With police escorts, he stood among the poles, trembling. A single red flower in his hand. He whispered, "This is where she took her last breath." Daniel's brother collapsed when handed the journal. He pressed the damp, decayed book to his forehead as if trying to absorb Daniel's final thoughts. Ethan's sister placed her own red and black bracelet beside the one recovered, knotting it onto the same pole. 2 threads of memory tied together. The jungle buzzed relentlessly around them. But the grief was louder. Investigators pieced together scenarios. Scenario 1. Keller lured them to his hut, gained their trust, then turned on them. The poles were not for drying skins, but for something ritualistic or sadistic. Scenario 2. They stumbled upon illegal logging operations. Keller, perhaps working with loggers, helped dispose of them as a warning. Scenario 3. A conflict escalated. Food theft, mistrust, paranoia. But the bindings and staged poles argued against a simple altercation. Each theory pointed back to human cruelty. And yet, the jungle refused to yield a body of proof beyond bones. Ropes and silence. In January 2022, a breakthrough emerged. A man named Mateo Salazar, now in his 60s, came forward. A former logger, he admitted he had once seen Keller with the 3 foreigners. He described it vividly. They were walking behind him, tired, carrying packs. He shouted at them to hurry. I thought they were tourists paying him to guide. But their faces, they looked afraid. When asked why he never spoke earlier, Mateo lowered his eyes. The jungle has rules. You don't question men with knives. His testimony was the first independent account linking Keller directly to the missing trio. Ethan's bracelet became central to media coverage. Photos of it, delicate threads knotted tight, still bright red despite 12 years, spread worldwide. Journalists called it the thread of fate, the jungle's relic. For Ethan's sister, it was unbearable. That's my childhood, hanging there. That's my brother, waiting there. The object haunted every update, reminding audiences this wasn't just a story of bones and theories. It was love, frozen in time. As investigators dug deeper, they faced the cruel reality. 12 years had stripped away so much evidence. DNA degraded, rope fibers fragile, photographs blurred. What remained were fragments, yet the families refused to let the case sink again. In London, Manchester, Melbourne, and Denver, new vigils were held. This time not for hope of return, but for justice. Candles flickered beneath photos of the trio, smiling in hostels, holding guitars, clutching cameras, but the vigils carried a darker edge. People whispered about Keller not as a recluse, but as a predator. In March 2022, Peruvian police announced a shocking update. A team had ventured deeper beyond Keller's abandoned hut, pushing into terrain few had dared enter. There, hidden in undergrowth, they found something chilling, a rusted metal trunk, half buried. Inside were belongings, not just of the backpackers but of others. Tattered passports from travelers missing years earlier, watches, shoes, a necklace. and in the corner of the trunk, wrapped in oilskin, a photograph, Hans Keller, gaunt and shirtless, standing in front of the same pole circle clearing. His hand rested on a machete, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked on the camera, as if daring the viewer to enter his world. Case was no longer just about three backpackers. The jungle had revealed a hunter. Fade to black. Rusted trunk changed everything. Passports. Inside bore names of travelers from Germany, Chile, and even Brazil, individuals long reported missing in remote corners of Peru's jungle. Their disappearances had never been linked. Until now. And then, that photograph. Hans Keller, gaunt and shirtless, machete in hand, standing proudly in front of the same clearing where the backpackers' remains were found. His presence in the image was undeniable. Interpol issued a red notice. Keller was no longer a shadow. He was a fugitive, a predator who had evaded justice for more than a decade. But was he still alive? In April 2022, a combined Peruvian Interpol task force launched a full expedition upriver. The jungle was hostile, oppressive. Each night, investigators set up camp, the air thick with insect swarms, the ground vibrating with unseen movement. They followed faint trails Keller might have used, guided by old villagers' accounts. Days stretched into weeks. Then, on the 19th day, they stumbled on something. A hut, deep in the floodplain. Unlike the abandoned one discovered years earlier, this one showed signs of life. A smoldering fire pit, fresh footprints, sharpened stakes inside. Hanging from nails hammered into rough planks were more trophies, watches, torn photographs, and strands of rope carefully coiled. Keller had been there, but he was gone again. The jungle had cloaked him once more. Back in Lima, specialists re-examined every piece of evidence. Knife marks on bones suggested ritualized violence, not quick killings, but deliberate cruelty. Soil samples from beneath the poles contained traces of human blood, preserved in the anaerobic mud. Most chilling, partial DNA recovered from the ropes. It was not the victims, it was Keller's. The jungle hunter had left his genetic fingerprint on the bindings. This was the final confirmation. He had tied them to the poles. With Keller still at large, Peruvian courts declared him responsible in absentia. Evidence was overwhelming. The journal entries, the photos, the DNA, but absence robbed the families of closure. There was no trial to attend, no courtroom to face him in. Only the shadow of a man who had taken their children. Still, the declaration mattered. It gave the tragedy a name. The phrase "horrors of Keller" headlined newspapers. He was painted as a sadist who lured travelers with false hospitality before binding them in his clearing of poles. How many others had vanished in his jungle? No one knew. In July 2022, the families gathered at a memorial erected in Puerto Maldonado. 3 wooden crosses, carved from local mahogany, stood in the town square. At their base, photographs of Daniel Lavra and Ethan, vibrant, smiling before the jungle consumed them. Laura's father spoke haltingly. "We imagined accidents. We imagined they got lost. But this was cruelty. And cruelty lasts longer than time." Ethan's sister placed her bracelet alongside his recovered one, encased now in glass. 2 threads, bound forever. Daniel's brother read aloud from the final journal entry, his voice cracking. "Remember us. There wasn't a dry eye in the square." Months later, Peruvian authorities dismantled the circle of poles. Each one was cut down, processed as evidence, then burned in a controlled fire outside Puerto Maldonado. Reporters captured the image, flames licking skyward, smoke curling above the treetops, as if purging the horror from the forest itself. But fire does not erase memory. The clearing remains, an empty circle, silent but scarred, where vines still twist in unnatural arcs. The rediscovery reverberated far beyond Peru. Backpackers worldwide whispered about the case in hostels, warning each other, "Never trust the man of the river." Travel blogs once celebrating untouched jungles began posting cautions. Maps marked Madre de Dios as both wonder and grave. For the families, life split permanently in two, before and after the polls. Laura's father died in late 2023, a year after the memorial. His final words to his wife reportedly, "She's with me now." Ethan's sister became an advocate for missing travelers, launching a foundation called Threads of Memory, symbolized by the red and black bracelet. Daniel's brother, in interviews, often carried the decayed journal with him. He called it the last handshake from my brother. In the end, the jungle was not the villain. The heat, the storms, the insects, they were hostile but indifferent. Nature seeks no prey. The true horror came from a man who isolated himself, who fed his paranoia, who turned wilderness into his stage of cruelty. The poles were not relics of tribal tradition. They were inventions of obsession, symbols of domination, of the power to reduce travelers, dreamers with cameras, guitars, and journals into trophies. The jungle swallowed their cries, but the ropes preserved the truth. To this day, Hans Keller has never been found. Some believe he still drifts along the Las Piedras River, machete in hand, watching camps from the tree line. Others insist the jungle finally took him, his bones sinking unnoticed into the same soil where he bound his victims. But his absence leaves the story unfinished. When night falls in Madre de Dios, and the cicadas rise into deafening chorus, travelers sometimes say they feel watched, that the forest has eyes, that silence itself presses too hard. And perhaps, in the wind through the trees, there's an echo of Daniel's last plea. Remember us. The jungle remembers. The families remember. And now, so do we. Fade to black.